Need one more reason why your Safeway store is just better? How about free Cuisinart Classic Cutlery or Elite Flatware? That's right. For every $10 you spend, earn a free stamp saver you can redeem for Cuisinart items. Once you've collected between 30 and 60 stamps, you could start shopping for a variety of Cuisinart cutlery or flatware available at the in-store display. Present your items and stamp saver at checkout. It's simple. Spend $10, get your free stamp saver. Start collecting. Safeway. It's just better.
Blog Talk Radio. You're listening to Holistic Living, brought to you by East West Healing and Performance. And now, here are your hosts, Josh and Jeannie Rubin.
Hey everyone, this is Josh Rubin and Jeannie from Holistic Living. We got to get Ray Pete on. Obviously, this is what I show about, and we have to call him in because it doesn't have long distance. So the first couple minutes, you got to bear with us because we run into some technical difficulties. So I'm going to get Jeannie to actually get him on. So you're going to hear me for 2 seconds talking to her. What you're going to do is basically call into the show, and then go to join conference. Dial that number, and he should come on, and you should both be on. Let me know if you have trouble. All right, so today we're going to be talking about Ray Pete. I'm going to let him introduce himself because the guy's a researcher, an educator, an artist, you name it. And a lot of what he teaches and preaches definitely goes against the grain. So, and hopefully we can get him on the show because I'm going to be really disappointed. I thought I had this conference thing down pat, but obviously I'm having some technical difficulties with this. As I stated before, there's already people calling in. Unfortunately, I'm not going to take callers only because we only have an hour. He's got a lot to say. His stuff's against the grain, and I don't feel like people calling in starting conflict. So if I do have time at the end, we will take callers. But as of now, I'm not going to take callers, unfortunately. He's not on. There are some callers, so maybe I'll take them. But let's just go through some of the dirty work. Don't forget, as we always say, check our website, eastwesthealing.com. We get tons of free information on there, from YouTube to our blog to our Blog Talk Radio. Everything we do is free on there, so check it out. It's a wealth of information for yourself, clients. You know, we work with clients all over the world, and we have free consultations. So feel free to give us a call anytime. All our information is on our website. So let me just take one of the calls before we start while we're waiting for Ray to come on. Let's see. Hello? Hello? You know this happens, guys, and I have to be honest with you. I know it's a radio show, it's technology, but people call in, and I answer the call, and they don't say anything. And I have to be honest with you, it slightly irritates me. So if you're going to call in, you're going to be waiting, listen. If I say hello, that means you go, oh, hey, here's my question. Because if I don't hear anything, I'm going to just delete you. So let me check in with Jeannie to see where we're at, see if she has him on.
Is that an 8 or a 9?
That would be a... Sorry, guys. It's 9. We're just trying to get him on because he doesn't have long distance, and I thought I had this conference thing down pat. Let me know when he's on. I think we might have him.
Hi, Ray. How are you?
All right, guys. I think I got him. Are you... Hello, Jeannie?
Hello.
I got it.
Hey, Ray, we got you on the show. I got concerned for a second because I was having trouble dialing through my host pin, but we got you on. Sweet.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us today.
So today we're going to be talking about polyunsaturated fatty acids. And, of course, as you know, you've obviously done way more research on this subject than probably most people. It's quite a controversial topic because a lot of people are promoting taking these oils or eating these foods. So I wanted to, on our show, get your approach because we've studied you for years, and it's definitely brain twisting for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that have a lot of questions. We have a lot of questions, and we want to get in as much as we can. But I want maybe, if you want, I know you have a history. If you want to just give just a brief introduction to kind of who you are and maybe why you do what you do.
Okay. I was starting to study brain physiology in the 1968 when I went to University of Oregon, and found that the best scientists were working in reproductive physiology. And so even though the brain was my center of interest, I did my PhD work on reproductive physiology, in particularly female aging, and studying the effects of estrogen and the changes with aging. I saw that the old animals actually had more estrogen stimulation in their tissues than younger animals, and it was working basically like contraceptive pills to prevent fertility after middle age. And I noticed that the uteruses under the influence of aging and estrogen typically were darkened and contained a brown pigment, and that got me interested in how that pigment develops through aging, estrogen excess, or radiation is another thing that can cause it, or deprivation of oxygen. So I started studying this pigment, which is called lipofuscin, or age pigment, and saw that it had been studied quite a lot in the 1930s and 40s. They found that they were killing their animals by feeding them too much of the seeds that were rich in polyunsaturated fats, or fish in some cases, such as mink, were the ones that were being killed by an excess of fish in the diet. But even horse meat was killing animals like mink, which were carnivorous. And so if the horses had eaten flax or linseed, their fat was toxic to the carnivorous animals. And in the animals that ate too much of the unsaturated fats, they developed yellow fat disease, which in mink, it developed paralysis fairly quickly of the hind quarters. And then it would kill them, and it would turn out that their fat tissue was inflamed and waterlogged, and eventually it would turn yellow or brown. And that's the same pigment that appears in the uterus that has been overexposed to estrogen, or in the skin of an old person that has been exposed to sunlight. And the brain, all the organs develop this pigment with aging, but it develops in proportion to the amount of unsaturated fats in the diet. And the essential toxic effect of it is that it consumes oxygen even faster than the unoxidized unsaturated fatty acids. It acts as an enzyme equivalent, directly wasting energy and oxygen, producing some hydrogen peroxide in the process, and a variety of toxic effects. But oxygen wasting is really an essential factor. It also poisons in more direct ways the respiratory enzymes and the cellular cleanup systems, the proteolytic enzymes that should remove defective proteins, and that's seen in the brain of Alzheimer's patients. They accumulate a lot of these highly unsaturated oils, such as EPA and DHA, and in the process, these fats inactivate the enzymes which should remove the toxic proteins, such as the prion protein that is associated with all of the brain degenerative diseases. And similar things have different effects in different tissues. In cancer, for example, the proteolytic enzymes are also inhibited, but cancer cells have a pretty strong defense against lipid peroxidation. So it takes a very high level of lipid peroxide to kill cancer cells, where it will damage heart cells and brain cells very easily.
So we kind of jumped ahead, which is good because that's what people want to hear about, because a lot of people want to know about these fats. I want to just rewind it a little so people understand, there's more than three, but our body kind of, or our diets consist of proteins, carbs, and fats. So we're going to be talking about more on fats, but maybe just for the lay listener, can you explain the role of proteins and carbs and fats in the body before we go into the PUFAs?
Well, the basic structure of the body is built of proteins, and it's the function of the protein is to partly to produce energy and to replicate itself, but the functional and structural proteins are the reason we have to eat protein constantly. The fats we can synthesize our own saturated and unsaturated fats. When we synthesize the highly unsaturated fats ourselves from eating either sugar or protein, the longer unsaturated fats are called mead, acid, and the derivatives of that. And the sugars are able to produce energy, and so make it unnecessary to convert protein to energy. But in the absence of sugar or fat, we can easily convert protein into fat and sugar to produce energy.
Right. So obviously we're going to be talking more about fats. This is kind of the source of why we're here. You kind of just talked about their role. Why do you think there's such a misconception about healthy versus non-healthy fats?
The misconception started very quickly in the 1940s when the agricultural chemists found that they could fatten their animals faster if they poisoned their metabolic systems with an anti-thyroid drug, and they would get fat on very little food. Then that turned out to leave a carcinogenic residue in the meat, so they found out that corn and soybeans contained these polyunsaturated fats that would suppress the respiration of the animals and make them get fat on very little food. But in the process, they found that they were getting these yellow fat disease and brain degeneration, degeneration of the gonads, infertility, and so on. And the function of vitamin E in the 1930s had been identified as an anti-estrogen, but I mentioned that estrogen accelerates the breakdown of these fats, and as they saw a connection between excess estrogen and excess polyunsaturated fats, and began using vitamin E as an antioxidant rather than an anti-estrogen. So the new definition of vitamin E became very important because the agricultural industry was turning to the very fattening diet of high polyunsaturated oil foods such as corn and soybeans. And so to protect against the very toxic effects that killed their animals prematurely, they would use vitamin E and so it became known as an antioxidant rather than an anti-estrogen. And the medical people noticed that the cholesterol was lowered in the process of eating a lot of these polyunsaturated fats, and that led to the spreading of the marketing of unsaturated fats to the human food supply rather than just for the fattening farm animals. And since people didn't want to gain weight on the least amount of food, they needed a new reason for selling their fats to humans, and lowering cholesterol became the excuse in humans. But the agriculturists knew all through the 1940s that the corn and soy oils were very fattening and eventually very toxic. But since they sold their animals as soon as they reached a marketable size, they didn't care if they died later. They were killing them before they had a chance to die of the degenerative diseases.
So nowadays, when we're talking about fats, like most people, I think a lot of people have a misconception about what fats are in our diet. Maybe could you give us just what your thoughts are on what the fats are in the current diet today, where most people are getting them?
People are still talking about essential fatty acids as if they were almost a vitamin. When I was a kid in school, there was, whenever nutritionists would mention the unsaturated fatty acids, they would say possibly essential, or mentioning a controversy as to whether they were essential or not. In 1929, two researchers working for the agricultural industry, the Burrs, claimed that the linoleic acid and linolenic acid, which are now called the essential fatty acids, that they were essential nutrients. Previously, several researchers had demonstrated that animals could live perfectly without those if they were given vitamin-rich food, protein-rich food. And in fact, some German researchers found that animals didn't develop cancer. Something like 99% of cancers didn't develop when animals were deprived of linoleic and linolenic acids. But the Burrs ignored the previous existing evidence that these fats are not essential. They produced skin disease and gonadal defects when they deprived the animals of these two fatty acids. But at that time, only two of the B vitamins were known, and about 3 years later, one of these researchers put one of his fatty acid deficient rats in a chamber to measure its oxygen consumption, and found that when it was deficient in essential fatty acids, it was metabolizing 50% faster than normal, burning calories at a tremendous rate. And so its nutrition requirements were very high, but they were giving it just the same diet that they would feed ordinary animals. And in the 1940s, the Burrs never followed up on the meaning of that, but in the 1940s, researchers found that vitamin B6 deficiency causes exactly the symptoms that were blamed on the linoleic acid deficiency. So they fed their animals the diet that the Burrs had used, to demonstrate the so-called essentiality, and created the symptoms that the burrs had produced. Then they gave the animals only extra vitamin B6 and cured the condition. So what the burrs had demonstrated was that the essential fatty acids slow metabolism, making them need less food, and so prevented a deficiency on a deficient diet. But given a diet without those fats, but with adequate vitamin B6, there were no symptoms produced. But when the oil industry wanted to market their products, the metabolism-suppressing fatty acids, they simply ignored the fact that the burrs' work had been totally invalidated. And now, 70 years later, 80 years later, they're still citing the work of the burrs as the evidence that fatty acids, linoleic and linolenic, are essential. But now for 65 years, it's been perfectly established that they are not essential.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like...
Oh.
Go ahead, Jeannie. Go ahead.
That's okay, Josh.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, besides omega-3, which is linoleic acid, and omega-6, which is the linolenic acid, for the listeners, where else in our food supply do we consume these polyunsaturated fatty acids?
I didn't hear the last part of your question.
I was saying, besides the omega-3s and the omega-6s, for the purpose of the show and the listeners, where else in our food supply do we consume these polyunsaturated fatty acids?
Well, all natural foods contain small amounts of some of the polyunsaturated fats, like coconut oil contains about 1%, and beef, lamb, milk, and cheese contain a couple percent, depending on what they ate. But the really risky sources, for example, when you get above the equivalent of about a teaspoonful of the polyunsaturated fats per day for a person, 4 grams a day is where the breakdown of these starts showing an increased incidence of cancer and other degenerative diseases. And if you don't specialize in the foods that are naturally low in those fatty acids, you increase your risk of all of the toxic or degenerative influences. And the foods that are richest in these unstable and potentially toxic oils are grains, seeds, nuts, vegetables in general, and all of the animals which are not ruminants, which have eaten the vegetable polyunsaturated fats, so that horses, rabbits, chickens, which are not ruminants, will reflect in their diet. Pigs will reflect in their diet pretty exactly what they've been eating as they grew up. And fish eat algae and smaller organisms that have eaten algae and get a very high concentration of these polyunsaturated.
Right. So most people, I would assume there's a lot of practitioners and average people listening, people are overdoing seeds or overdoing nuts, and I don't think people realize, from reading yourself, why the seeds of the plants produce these polyunsaturated fatty acids. And when you say vegetables, could you be a little bit more specific just for the listeners so they have an understanding? When you say vegetables, you're talking above ground, below ground, you're talking green?
Yeah, if you think of where corn normally grows, or soybeans, in, say, Iowa, the corn produces its seed, and the seed sits on the ground for a few months during the winter, and sprouts has to begin sprouting when the weather is still fairly cool, so that the seed is basically kept in refrigeration all through the winter. And then when it starts warming up a little, it sprouts and produces a new plant. And it contains enough vitamin E that under this refrigerated situation, these polyunsaturated fats are stable enough that then the seed is still alive. But if you kept the seed warm all winter at, say, the temperature of a human body, these oils would react with oxygen, and the seed would be dead by springtime. And since the enzymes have to become active when the temperature is maybe 40 degrees or 50 degrees in the spring, if the oils were completely saturated, they would be like butter in the refrigerator at 40 degrees, hard and immobile. And so the unsaturated fats are still liquid and mobile at refrigerator temperature. If a fish lives at, say, 20 or 30 degrees, they can stand very cold temperatures if they have very polyunsaturated fats. They act as an antifreeze, and the fish, if it contained saturated fats, would be stiff like a cube of butter at refrigeration 40-degree temperature. So the organism needs mobile fats which are stable at low temperatures simply to function at those low temperatures. But if you look at the fish in the Amazon River, where the water is up around 90 degrees, these fish have fats that are just about as saturated as butter because their unsaturated fats would oxidize and degenerate if they were living at that temperature. If you grow soybeans in the tropics, soy oil then is practically as saturated as butter. The unsaturation is a defense to maintain mobility on the molecular level, but it requires an antioxidant as well as low temperature for the cell to survive using those unstable oils. In one experiment, when I was studying the effects of these in cells, I just put a rubber hose in a bottle of safflower oil and put the other end in a cup of water, and you could see the water rising in the rubber hose because the oil was consuming oxygen, just like I had an animal in the bottle respiring. The oil respires as it degenerates and consumes oxygen. And in your body at 98 degrees, that happens even faster than at room temperature.
So I guess for the listeners, would you agree that just because all that makes sense to some of us, but to some of the listeners are probably going, whoa. So would you say that you are more in favor of vegetables like squashes or root vegetables that have less, we could say very little polyunsaturated fatty acids in them, and you're not in favor of vegetables like greens and spinaches and lettuce and kales and things like that? The leaves are very good and important sources of magnesium and vitamin K, but you have to take into consideration the high proportion of polyunsaturated fats. So for calories,
calories. Squashes and root vegetables are safer as a major source of calories, but fruits are even better because the tissue contains a higher concentration of minerals than in the starchy vegetables.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because based off your work, I think that's reading it. It's definitely the science is fascinating. It's very challenging for us, and I can imagine for the layperson. But those are some of the conclusions that we've come to in regards to working with people with vegetables and getting results. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up so the listeners can get an understanding of where you're at.
Potatoes are more like a fruit or an animal protein in the total nutritional value, even though because they contain practically no fat, it's good to have some kind of animal fat with the potato. But some of the roots are very starchy. Potato happens to be a very balanced vegetable.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So in regards to the omega-3s, I mean, so many people today think that omega-3s produce non-inflammatory prostaglandins. And I kind of want to get your take on that. I mean, do we need essential fatty acids to produce prostaglandins to fight inflammation, or is that just kind of something that is not so true?
Some of the recent work on the anti-inflammatory effect of the fish oil or the omega-3 fats shows that they accumulate with aging, for example, in the brain, and Alzheimer's or dementia patients have a much higher level of these in the brain. And they spontaneously oxidize into not only toxic anti-metabolic, anti-brain tissue substances, the neuroprostanes, for example, but in the process of oxidizing, they suppress the immune system too. It's an across-the-board toxic effect, but when you look at the immune system, suppressing the cells that produce inflammation, you get an interruption of an existing inflammatory process. Several researchers have found that it's only the oxidized form, the broken down form of the fish oil that has the anti-inflammatory effect. And when you prolong the feeding with this anti-inflammatory effect, you start seeing that immunodepression is the longer range effect. And the present extreme advocacy of fish oil for its anti-inflammatory effect is very similar to what the X-ray industry was doing 80 years ago, even as recently as the 1950s and 60s. They were still treating arthritis, acne, psoriasis, ringworm, anything with an inflammatory component with X-ray treatment, because its immediate effect is to create these lipid peroxides, which are anti-inflammatory immediately, immunosuppressive in the long run, and toxic in many ways eventually.
So, Ray, if you could tell us, unfortunately this show is only 1 hour, and we have about 25 minutes left, which is great, but I want to kind of get to more stuff. Maybe tell us, for the listeners, because most people say, well, there's all these diets out there, the paleo diet, the metabolic typing, all these diets, and now, a lot of what we do is we promote a lot of your work, and people are like, well, now you're telling me I can't eat anything. It's like, I just can't, what am I supposed to eat? So maybe just tell us kind of like two things. Can you give us 5 key points on why you feel PUFAs are so dangerous? And then maybe some alternative fats, we can work into that, some alternative fats that are much more beneficial for our bodies.
Oh, well, olive oil is pretty safe because it has a great variety of antioxidants. Even though it's 10% PUFA, I recommend not eating more than maybe a couple teaspoonfuls per day, just because of that PUFA content that eventually can build up. But the toxicity of the PUFA will depend on your total calorie intake, because if you use it for fuel as fast as you eat it, then it's going to have relatively small harmful effects. It's when you put it into storage and let it really decompose and have its long-range effect on your fat tissue and brain tissue, that's when it becomes most harmful. Coconut oil has only around 1 or 2% of, depending on the temperature of where it grows, of the polyunsaturated fats. And so coconut oil and butter can actually have an antioxidant effect, blocking the effects of these other breakdown products of the PUFA, and can help to clean your tissues of the fats that you ate previously. And sugar from whatever source, but especially from fruits, because of the minerals that help to stabilize and organize the metabolism, sugar is naturally turned into saturated fats, and we immediately create an omega-9 type of fat when we synthesize fat from sugar. And the mead acid is produced from any fat that we make ourselves, and these go on to make the multiply polyunsaturated fats that are used in a few places, and they have an anti-inflammatory effect. So by avoiding the toxic anti-inflammatory effects, we're allowing our body to produce the natural anti-inflammatory mead acid series of fats, or omega-9.
And that's through the use of the saturated fats?
It's really what?
Is that through the intake of saturated fats? Saturated, not unsaturated.
Oh, yeah, we can produce these from saturated fats, such as in cocoa butter, chocolate fat. That's stearic acid, and we can turn stearic acid into the omega-9 fats.
Very interesting.
So, for the listeners, Ray is promoting the use of saturated fats and not promoting the use of these PUFAs, it goes against all societal belief, because I would say 99% of the clients we work with come in, they're on cod liver oil, they're pumping fish oil into their body. And the interesting thing, researching yourself and reading, you talk about PUFAs and these fatty acids storing in the tissues, which is really interesting if you could elaborate on that, and how with the stress reaction or low glucose levels, that can actually in itself create hormonal or hypothyroid-like symptoms. Can you elaborate on that for the listeners?
Yeah, it's very interesting, but very few people have been researching it, that estrogen favors in some way the storage of these polyunsaturated fats, and these fats favor the influence of estrogen and activate estrogen. So the thing that got me interested in it in the first place, people are still working on that strange mutual effect of estrogen and the polyunsaturated fats. But why it happens, I don't think anyone knows. When a mammal is born, the brain and all of the tissues are, by the present standards, they're deficient in in the essential fatty acids, because the presence of the meat acid that we synthesize naturally is taken as an indicator of deficiency of the essential fatty acids. And the growth of the fetus is inhibited when you try to correct that so-called deficiency by feeding the mother increased amounts of either the seed oils or the fish oils. The seed oils strongly inhibit our ability to make the meat acid, and the fish oils, one good thing about them is that they are less inhibiting of our ability to make meat acid than the seed oils are. But when 35 years ago experimenters fed pregnant mice and other animals various diets with corn oil versus coconut oil, or chocolate fat versus soy oil, and so on, they found that the unsaturated fats caused the pregnant animals to have small-brained babies, which didn't learn very well. And just about a year and a half ago, some French researchers were going to demonstrate that pregnant women who were eating more of the unsaturated fats had smarter babies already developing in their uterus. They developed a way to produce a sound and measure the brain wave of the fetus, and they were going to demonstrate that the fetuses in the women who ate the unsaturated fats were learning quicker, but in fact they found that they were less able to learn in proportion to the amount of polyunsaturated fat in their diet. And when they were born, they turned out to be smaller and to have smaller brains. So it was exactly the opposite of what they predicted that they would find. But it exactly agreed with what the animal researchers had found 35 years ago. One of the marketing tools of the baby formula industry is to say that their product is more like breast milk because they add the omega-3 fats to it. And their argument, there have been quite a few experiments measuring the baby's visual acuity, and they don't mention that several of the experiments showed that the visual development was slower in the babies that had the polyunsaturated fats, but they claim that it accelerates the development of visual acuity. And they also don't mention that some studies show that brain damage increases the visual acuity for these grading sensing tests.
Do you feel that, with the elimination of these PUFAs, in veggies and oils and increasing in saturated fats, that this could actually, reverse a lot of the things that we're seeing today with hormonal imbalances and hypothyroidism and immune system distortions and whatnot?
Yeah.
And how would that work?
About almost 20 years ago, I had been reading, thinking about these ever since 1970 when I was doing my thesis, but I just hadn't done much with my diet. I'd stopped using any of the liquid cooking oils or salad oils, but I just hadn't been extreme in my diet. But I decided to experiment by adding half an ounce to an ounce of coconut oil to my food. And the immediate thing that I noticed was that for about an hour and a half after eating a tablespoon or so of coconut oil, my heart was running at a higher rate, and I was breathing harder, and my skin was pinker. And that went on for several days, And after a couple of weeks, I saw that I was losing weight quickly, even though I was eating more calories per day. And I had, for about, 30 years, I had maintained the same weight. But after 2 or 3 weeks, I saw that I was heading for a lower plateau of weight, and I've stayed there ever since, just occasionally adding a tablespoon or so of coconut oil helps activate my thyroid, in effect, because constantly when we draw on the stored unsaturated fats, in proportion to the unsaturation of the fats circulating in the blood, all functions of our thyroid system are inhibited. We produce less hormone, we transport it less effectively, it enters the mitochondria and nucleus less effectively, and so if you do anything to interrupt that supply of stored unsaturated fats, you immediately, like in 15 minutes, will feel the surge of respiratory activity. And hospitals 20 or 30 years ago started using soy oil emulsions to prevent weight loss in cancer patients. And they quickly were seeing that their immune systems were suppressed, but within about 15 minutes of putting a dose of the emulsified oil into the bloodstream, their blood sugar went up. It immediately impairs the ability to oxidize glucose. And that's a whole line of diabetes research that isn't getting much public attention, but it's called the Randall effect, or the Randall cycle. This person showed that the immediate effect of the presence of unsaturated fats is to block the oxidation of glucose. And chronically, then you have the oxidative damage to the mitochondria that cause permanent respiratory defects.
Interesting stuff.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating that research is out there and we're still seeing. I mean, people are just eating huge amounts of polyunsaturated fatty acids, taking huge amounts of these fish oils and cod liver oils and whatnot, and I just don't understand with it out there why we're still seeing this. You know, with so much disease, why we're still seeing this when it's been shown over and over again.
There's a lot of money being invested in publicizing their product.
It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, everyone is still advertising that their baby formula contains omega-3, but the couple of little studies that showed that just the fact of putting it in a dehydrated powdered formula, you get a tremendous oxidative destruction of the fats, something that you wouldn't get if you ate the same fats in a fish or got it in breast milk.
So, Ray, we got about 10 minutes left, and I want to kind of summarize the show and then maybe take a question, because unfortunately an hour goes by quick, and I honestly could probably talk to you for the next 8 hours about this easily. But if you could summarize for the listeners, like I said, maybe 5 points for the listeners on why you don't like the poofs that are in vegetables and these cod liver oils. For example, because it can lead to, mitochondrial issues and fatigue. Like some key points that people can walk away with, it's kind of stirring their brain so they understand, well, maybe this stuff is really not that good for me.
It promotes estrogen's effect and interferes with the synthesis of progesterone and other protective steroids, and inhibits thyroid, which really affects everything, including the ratio of estrogen to progesterone. And the chronic effect of the accumulated age pigment is it's one of the powerful motors of aging. The wasting of oxygen is characteristic of stress, aging, PUFA poisoning, estrogen poisoning, and radiation poisoning. And it actually makes you more sensitive to any mild radiation exposure. The doctors and dentists who are telling the patient that their X-ray dose is minimal neglect even to think about what the diet of the patient has to do with their sensitivity, but it has a great effect on how much damage you get from a given dose of X-ray. In looking at the historical effects, the publicity picks out only what looks like a good effect, but they neglect that in Japan, for example, the amount of fish in the diet corresponds to several types of cancer, digestive tract cancer, for example, and the metastatic cancers of several types are promoted very distinctly by fish oils and omega-3 fats, not only the seed oils and omega-6 fats that have been known to be carcinogenic for 70 or 80 years, but now the omega-3s are known to promote several types of cancer and metastatic cancer. And several brain diseases or degenerative conditions besides Alzheimer's, including Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS, are promoted. The actual formation of the prion in any of the prion diseases, and Alzheimer's resembles the mad cow disease, but the actual formation of the toxic prion protein is accelerated by the polyunsaturated fats.
So for the listeners, I want to maybe, Ray, do you mind taking a call or no?
Sure, anytime.
Okay. So for the listeners, I've been reading Ray stuff for probably 6 years, and it's intense stuff. It's deep, but it's a 180 of everything you learn. Let's put it that way. And probably people listening going, "What? This doesn't make any sense." All I can recommend is go to his website, raypeat.com, RAYPEAT.com. He's got, I think, he's got 5 books. I would start there. They're awesome. I've read each one probably 6 times. He's got tons of articles on his website that are a little bit deeper, but all your questions will be answered in those books and on his articles. So I highly recommend you reading it, whether you're a layperson or a practitioner. And the bottom line is, if you read an article, just get ready to read it about 6+ times over before you even understand a piece of it, which is awesome. So let's take a caller and see what we got going on here. Hello, you're on the air. Wait.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Yeah, you got a question for Ray?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I'm a pretty big metabolic typing fanatic, and I am a protein type, and I can't seem to get very many fats other than the fat that comes in meat. And if I can't, obviously if you're suggesting that maybe these nuts aren't actually good for us like we've been told, how do you recommend getting the recommended amount of fat in that sense? I mean, I take coconut oil on a pretty daily basis, but that's really my only source other than animal fat, and I have vegetables here and there, but not very often due to my protein type. So I'm not sure if you're aware of metabolic typing or all that stuff, but that's kind of more what I'm asking.
Well, tropical foods in general are pretty safe. The nuts that grow at a very high temperature are like coconuts, very saturated in their fats. And the reason I recommend tropical fruits is that the small amount of fats in those are highly saturated. So anything that lives or grows at a high temperature is going to be safe when it gets in our body at the same high temperature.
Oh, okay, cool.
Cool. Thanks for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I think too, Ray, and I could be wrong, that most people are so influenced by what they learn and what they know, and they get so, and this is just my opinion, they get so caught up in a system that they live by the system. If they stray from the system, it's almost like, I don't want to say they make the symptoms up and they're feeling them, but it's almost like they feel like they're going against the tribe per se. Like, oh my God, I can't have that because I'm a fast oxidizer metabolic type. And if I eat that, I'm going to feel bad. So when they do, they kind of feel bad. And I only say that because we followed metabolic typing for a long time until we started straying and following the approach and kind of just abolished what I learned from other systems to try it, and it's worked amazing, kind of just opening myself up.
One of the things I didn't mention at all was the interaction between intestinal toxins and the unsaturated fats, but that's a whole area that's very important. But the leakiness of the intestine is promoted by many things, but it's worse when you are highly unsaturated.
Right. Let me take one more caller and we'll wrap it up. Let's see. Hello, you're on the air. You gotta not to push you along. We got 4 minutes. You gotta make the question to Ray kind of quick. Are you there? All right, there you go. See you later. We'll try this one last guy that's been on here for a while. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yeah, you got to make it a little bit quick. We got 3 minutes, so you got to make it snappy.
Okay, all right. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
Okay. Hey, Ray, how you doing?
Hi.
I was curious about polyunsaturated fats and the whole temperature thing. And so how do bears do it?
Bears?
Yeah, because they obviously get a lot of PUFAs, and they're obviously at 98 degrees, and they get a ton of PUFAs. I was just wondering what if there was any studies or info there.
I think they like to eat lots of berries for fattening up in the fall, but the hibernating, I think their temperature drops quite a bit. Their fat temperature is reduced during the winter. With squirrels and other hibernators, they've seen that if they don't let them eat the PUFA nuts, if they give them a saturated diet, plenty of carbohydrates, they don't hibernate. That the serotonin that triggers hibernation comes up when you reach a certain point of unsaturation in your fats. Yeah.
If you read his book, Generative Anatomy, he talks about that in Generative Anatomy. And I think another book of his, he touches upon that. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All right. I got to wrap it up, so I'm sorry I got to hang up on you, but I appreciate the questions.
Okay.
All right, we got 2 minutes left. Like I said, I wish we could keep going. I'd love to have you on again and maybe continue this, or a lot of people want to know more about the thyroid. Everyone's asking about sugar, which is a huge topic with you, so I'd love to have you on again maybe in the next coming months to talk about your take on sugar. But we got about 60 seconds left. Is there anything you want to add before we have to wrap it up?
No.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate you taking time out to come on our show, and just want you to know we really value your work and everything you put out, and we try to promote it as much as we can, not only promoting it, but using it with ourselves and our clients. So we just want to say thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ray. Have a great day.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys, there it was. The long-anticipated show with Ray. Of course, 60 minutes. Definitely not long enough to talk about a huge subject. He's got a lot to say, and a lot of it for people is mind-bending. But the goal is you have a little bit of an outline of what he thinks and why these things are bad for us. we can't tell you everything, right? As I've said before, like Charles Poliquin says, what am I at, you fucking librarian? Go do the research, go to his website, buy his books, and just start diving into this, because I can tell you that from using his work, it's had a profound effect in our lives and our clients' lives. So thanks for tuning in. We'll check you later. We got new shows coming in January. We're not going to do any in December. So tune in. We're going to do homeopathy, more emotional stuff, and have Ray on again. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.